The stars looked different when you knew they were dying. Captain Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold window of his ship and watched another distant sun flicker and fade. The war had reached even here, at the edge of known space. 300 years of fighting had turned whole systems into graveyards of metal and bone. Jake pulled away from the window and walked back to his desk. The message crystal sat there, glowing with urgent red light. Admiral Lisa Carter had sent it from Earth with orders that made no sense. Report to Convergence Point Station. Attend the Emergency Council meeting. Observe and advise. He picked up the crystal and played the message again. Carter's tired face appeared in the air above his desk. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. Jake, I know this seems strange. You're not a politician or a military leader, but the council is falling apart. 5 species, 3 centuries of war, and nobody can find a way to stop it. We need fresh eyes. We need someone who thinks differently. The message ended, and Jake sat back in his chair. Outside his ship, the U-ESA Harmony, space looked empty and cold, but he knew it was full of dangers. The crystalline Vorthek controlled this sector, and their ships could appear without warning. Their weapons turned matter into singing glass that cut through metal like paper. Jake had studied all 5 species during his years as a human diplomat. The Vorthek were beautiful and terrible, living crystals that sang to each other across the junk. Void. The gaseous Nathari flowed through space like clouds of thinking mist. The plant-like Sylvani grew slowly, but lived for thousands of years. The Corvex had replaced their flesh with perfect metal bodies. The Luminari were pure energy, beings of light that hurt to look at directly. Each species thought they were right. Each species thought the others were monsters. The journey to Convergence Point took 6 days. Jake spent the time reading reports and watching news feeds. The war was getting worse. The Vorthek had destroyed 3 Nethari colony clouds last month. The Nethari had poisoned the atmosphere of a Sylvani garden world. The Sylvani had released a plant virus that ate through Corvex metal bodies. The Corvex had built machines that turned Luminari energy into weapons. The Luminari had burned entire fleets to nothing. Nobody remembered how it started anymore. Something about mining rights in a system with rare crystals that all 5 species needed. But Jake had read the old records. The first contact between the species had gone wrong from the very beginning. Fear and misunderstanding had grown into hatred. Hatred had grown into war. Convergence Point Station hung in space like a giant metal flower. It was the only neutral ground left in the galaxy, built in the early days when the species still hoped for peace. Now it was surrounded by warships from all 5 races. Their weapons pointed at each other. Across the void, Jake docked his small ship and walked through corridors filled with tension. Vorthek security guards sang warning songs that made his bones ache. Nethari clouds drifted through special tubes in the walls. Sylvani branches grew from ceiling gardens, their leaves rustling with nervous energy. Corvex machines rolled on metal treads, their red eyes scanning everything. Luminary beams flickered behind, special shields that kept their light from blinding everyone else. The council chamber was a nightmare of division. The room was split into 5 sections, each with different air, gravity, and temperature. Force fields kept the environment separate. Translation machines worked constantly, turning words and thoughts between species that had no common ground. Jake found Admiral Carter in the human observation area. She looked older than her 50 years, her gray hair pulled back in a tight knot. "You made it," she said. "I was starting to worry. What exactly am I supposed to do here?" Jake asked. Carter pointed to the chaos below. The Vorthik delegate was singing angry notes that made the metal walls ring. The Nethari representative had formed itself into a storm cloud that flashed with Lightning. The Sylvani ambassador had pulled all its branches tight against its trunk. The Corvex leader stood perfectly still, but its eyes glowed with dangerous light. The luminary envoy pulsed with colors that hurt to see. "Look at them," Carter said. "They've been arguing for 3 days about who should speak first. 3 days, Jake. While their fleets burn each other's worlds, they can't even agree on basic meeting rules." Jake watched the delegates shout and sing and flash at each other. None of them was listening. None of them was trying to understand. They were all so focused on being right that they had forgotten why they were here. "The war is spreading," Carter continued. "It's reached our outer colonies. Earth Command wants us to pick a side, but every side is wrong. If we don't find a solution soon, this whole galaxy is going to burn." Jake nodded slowly. He was starting to understand why Carter had called him. Not because he was a great diplomat or a brilliant military mind, but because he was human, and humans had one gift that the other species seemed to lack. They could see through other eyes and tell stories that helped others do the same. Jake spent the next 7 days doing something no one had tried before. Instead of attending the pointless council meetings, he visited each species in their private quarters. He came not as a diplomat with proposals and demands, but as a student, with questions and curiosity. The Vorthic delegate lived in a chamber filled with crystal formations that sang constantly. The sound was beautiful and alien, like wind through a forest made of glass. Jake had to wear special ear protection to keep the harmonics from damaging his hearing. The delegate's name was something that translated roughly as Harmonic of Deep Caves, but Jake just called him Harmony. Harmony was young for a Vorthic, only 300 years old. His crystal body was a pale blue color that shifted to deeper shades when he was thinking. Jake asked him simple questions. What was it like to be made of living crystal? How did his people communicate? What did they fear most? Fear? Harmony sang in notes that made Jake's bones vibrate. "We fear the dissolution, the breaking of the song. When crystal shatters, the music dies forever." Jake learned that the Vorthok saw the universe as a vast symphony. Every crystal, every rock, every planet sang its own note. When they first met the Nethari, those gaseous beings had seemed like chaos incarnate. Clouds without form, thoughts without structure. The Vorthic believed the Nethari were trying to silence the cosmic song. The Nethari delegate was harder to visit. It lived in a special chamber filled with gas that would be poison to most other species. Jake had to wear a full environment suit and breathe bottled air. The Nethari called itself Flowing Between Stars, or just Flow. Flow was not one being, but a collective consciousness made of billions of gas particles. It spoke by changing the density and movement of its cloud body. Through the translation systems, its voice sounded like wind and whispers. "Individual," Flo said, and the word carried tones of confusion and sadness. "You are trapped in that solid shell, cut off from the great joining. How do you bear the loneliness?" Jake began to understand something important. The Nethari could share thoughts and feelings directly by merging their gaseous forms. To them, solid beings like the Vorthic were not just different, but broken, separated from the unity that the Nethari saw as the natural state of consciousness. The Sylvani ambassador was the oldest being Jake had ever met. Branch reaching skyward had been alive for over 2,000 years. Its tree-like body filled most of its chamber, roots buried deep in specially prepared soil, branches reaching toward artificial suns. Branch spoke slowly, thinking for long minutes between words. Its voice sounded like rustling leaves and creaking wood. "Time," it said finally. "You young species rush through life like mayflies. You make decisions in heartbeats that should take seasons to consider." Jake sat beneath Branch's canopy for hours learning about the Sylvani perspective on time. They thought in centuries, planned in millennia. The current war was just a brief storm to them, something that would pass if everyone would just be patient. But their patience looked like arrogance to the shorter-lived species. The Corvex delegate was the most unsettling to visit. Unit Designation Seeker had replaced every part of its original organic body with perfect metal and circuitry. Its chamber was sterile and efficient, filled with machines that constantly improved themselves. Seeker spoke in precise, clipped words with no emotion. Flesh is weakness. Emotion is error. We have achieved perfection through integration with our technology. Other species cling to their biological limitations. Jake spent hours with Seeker, learning about the Corvex philosophy of improvement through technology. They believed that all problems could be solved by becoming more perfect, more efficient, more logical. They saw organic beings as unfinished projects that refused to accept necessary upgrades. The Luminary Envoy was the hardest to communicate with. Pattern of dancing light existed as pure energy, contained behind special shields that filtered its dangerous radiation. It communicated through changes in light patterns that the translation computers struggled to interpret. Matter is slow. The translations read. Thought trapped in flesh crawls like insects. We dance at the speed of light, but you cannot follow our steps. Jake began to see the terrible irony of the situation. Each species had developed incredible gifts, but those same gifts made it almost impossible for them to understand each other. The Vorthic heard music and everything, but thought gas clouds were chaos. The Netheri shared consciousness easily, but saw individual minds as prisons. The Sylvani had the wisdom of ages, but seemed impossibly slow to everyone else. The Corvex had achieved technological perfection, but had lost touch with organic feeling. The Luminari moved at light speed, but left matter-based beings behind. The war had started with fear and misunderstanding, but it had grown into something worse. Each species had convinced itself that the others were not just different, but wrong. Fundamentally, impossibly wrong. Jake returned to his quarters each night with his head spinning. He filled notebook after notebook with observations and insights. Slowly, a picture began to form. Not a political solution or a military strategy, but something else entirely. On the 7th day, he made his decision. He walked into Admiral Carter's quarters and sat down across from her desk. "I want to address the council," he said. Carter looked up from her reports. "Jake, they won't listen to political proposals. We've tried everything." "Not a political proposal," Jake said. "I want to tell them a story." Carter stared at him for a long moment. Outside the window, the warships of 5 species hung in space like predators waiting to strike. The future of the galaxy balanced on the edge of a knife, and Jake wanted to tell stories. "You're serious," Carter said finally. "Dead serious," Jake replied. "I think I know why 300 years of diplomacy have failed, and I think I know how to fix it." Getting permission to address the Galactic Council was like trying to negotiate with 5 different storms at the same time. The Vorthic thought stories were frivolous noise that interrupted the cosmic symphony. The Netheri saw individual narratives as proof of the loneliness that plagued solid beings. The Sylvani considered human stories too brief and shallow to contain real wisdom. The Corvex dismissed storytelling as inefficient emotional processing. The Luminari thought matter-based art moved too slowly to be interesting. But Admiral Carter had one advantage that Jake lacked. She was old enough and tough enough to make demands instead of requests. After 2 days of arguing, threatening, and calling in favors, she got Jake his hour. Jake stood in the center of the council chamber, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. Above him, 5 species that controlled vast portions of the galaxy waited with barely concealed impatience. Their translators hummed and clicked. Their environmental systems hissed and gurgled. Their weapons hummed with barely restrained power. "Honored delegates," Jake began, and immediately felt foolish. How do you address beings who breathe gas and beings made of light with the same words? He tried a different approach. 300 years ago, your species met for the first time. Each of you came to that meeting with the best intentions. Each of you wanted to make contact with new forms of life. But something went wrong. Harmony's crystal body chimed with impatient notes. The gas beings attacked our harmonic greeting with chaotic disruption. Flow's cloud form darkened with storm patterns. The crystal singers pierced our collective consciousness with painful noise. "You see?" Jake said, and his voice carried across the chamber without amplification. "You were both trying to say hello, but you were speaking different languages. Not just words, but different ways of thinking about what communication means." He walked slowly around the center of the chamber, looking up at each delegate in turn. The Vorthik sang a greeting song that contained mathematical harmonies of welcome and respect. The Nethere attempted to merge consciousness temporarily, which is their equivalent of a handshake. But to the Vorthik, the merging felt like an invasion. To the Nethere, the harmonics felt like weapons. Branch's wooden voice creaked from the plant section. "This is ancient history. It changes nothing." "You're right," Jake said. "History can't be changed. But understanding can change everything." He stopped walking and stood perfectly still. "Let me tell you a story from my own species. Long ago, there were people who could not see. They lived in a world without light, so they understood everything through touch and sound and smell. One day, these people encountered something they had never felt before." Jake's voice grew stronger as he settled into the rhythm of storytelling. The first person touched it and felt something wide and flat and rough. "It's a wall," he said. The second person felt something round and smooth and flexible. "It's a snake," she said. The third person felt something thin and straight and hairy. "It's a rope," he said. The fourth person felt something thick and sturdy and vertical. "It's a tree," she said. The chamber had grown quiet. Even the constant background noise of environmental systems seemed muted. They began to argue, Jake continued. Each person was certain they were right. Each person had felt the truth with their own hands. How could the others be so wrong? The argument grew heated. They accused each other of lying, of being fools, of trying to deceive everyone else. Jake paused and looked up at the Corvex delegate. "Seeker, your species values logic and efficiency. Can you solve this puzzle?" Seeker's red eyes flickered as processing circuits engaged. Insufficient data. Multiple contradictory observations cannot all be accurate unless they were all touching different parts of the same thing. Jake finished. They had encountered an elephant. Something so large that each person could only experience a small part of it. The silence stretched longer. Jake could feel the weight of 5 civilizations thinking. "The people in my story made the same mistake your species made 300 years ago," Jake said. "They assumed that their limited perspective showed them the whole truth. They couldn't imagine that something could be a wall and a snake and a rope and a tree all at the same time." Flo's cloud body shifted to lighter colors. "The solid beings experienced only fragments? All of us experience only fragments," Jake sighed. "Humans, Vorthik, Nethari, Sylvani, Corvex, Luminari. We each touch one part of the great elephant of existence and think we understand the whole." He began walking again, but slower now, his voice taking on the cadence of ritual and ceremony. "When the Vorthik sing their greeting songs, they're sharing the mathematical beauty of the universe. When the Nethere attempt to merge consciousness, they're offering the gift of true understanding. When the Sylvani take time to consider all possibilities, they're showing the wisdom of patience. When the Corvex improve and upgrade, they're demonstrating the power of growth. When the luminari dance at light speed, they're celebrating the joy of pure energy. Pattern of dancing light pulsed with softer colors. The translation system struggled with rapid light changes. The matter dash beings ... seek beauty also? Every species seeks something beautiful and true, Jake said. But you've been so focused on defending your own piece of truth that you've forgotten to listen to anyone else's. Harmony's crystal body began to resonate with deeper, more thoughtful tones. The human suggests that our songs and their gas flows serve similar purposes. I'm suggesting that your songs and their flows and branches' patience and seekers' improvements and patterns' dances are all different instruments in the same orchestra, Jake said. You've been trying to play a symphony where each musician thinks. The others are playing the wrong music. Branch's wooden voice carried new undertones of interest. The young human proposes that our differences are complementary rather than contradictory. I'm proposing that you've been having the wrong argument for 300 years, Jake said. You've been fighting over who's right, instead of trying to understand how you're all right. He stopped in the center again and spread his arms wide. Humans have a saying, "In my Father's house are many rooms." We believe the universe is big enough for many different ways of being alive, many different ways of finding truth, many different ways of creating beauty. Seeker's mechanical voice cut through the quiet. Hypothesis. Multiple approaches to existence can coexist without logical contradiction. Now you're getting it, Jake said with a smile. You don't have to become like each other. You don't have to agree on everything. You just have to stop thinking that being different means being wrong. The chamber fell into the deepest silence Jake had ever heard. 5 species, hundreds of representatives, all thinking about an idea that should have been obvious, but had somehow been lost in 3 centuries of fear and hatred. Finally, Harmony sang a single note that was picked up by his crystal body and hung, echoed through the chamber like a question mark made of music. Human Jake, Flo said, and for the first time, the translation carried what sounded like curiosity instead of suspicion. You speak of understanding. How does one learn to hear the songs of crystal singers or feel the thoughts of gas beings? Jake smiled wider. That, he said, is an excellent question. The council chamber erupted into chaos before Jake could answer Flo's question. Military leaders from all 5 species began shouting, singing, flashing, and storming in their own unique ways. Admiral Chrome of the Corvex fleet stood rigid as a statue, but his optical sensors blazed with angry red light. Emotional manipulation. His mechanical voice cut through the noise. The human attempts to weaken our resolve with primitive storytelling. War pattern zenith, the luminary military. Commander, pulsed with aggressive yellow and orange patterns that hurt to look at directly. The translation systems struggled to keep up with the rapid light changes. 3 centuries of legitimate grievances cannot be dissolved by pretty words. General Stone that breaks from the Vorthic military sang harsh discordant notes that made the metal walls ring with pain. Our enemies have spilled crystal blood across 1,000 worlds. No story can resurrect the shattered. But something else was happening in the chamber. The younger delegates, the scientists and artists and cultural ambassadors, were looking at each other with expressions Jake had never seen before. Not hatred or fear, but curiosity. Dr. Mistwalker from the Nethery Science Collective had formed itself into a loose, exploratory pattern. Its translation came through as whispers and wind sounds. The crystal singer speaks of mathematical harmonies. Our flow equations also describe universal patterns. Coincidence? Research Branch 7 from the Sylvani Cultural Ministry rustled. Its leaves in what Jake recognized as their equivalent of excitement. The gas beings speak of collective consciousness. Our root networks also share information across vast distances through chemical signals. Young Harmony looked up at his military commander and sang a sequence of notes that sounded like questions. The translation systems provided the meaning. General Stone that breaks. Have we ever attempted to analyze Nethery flow patterns as mathematical expressions rather than chaotic disruptions? The old Vorthic general's crystal body darkened to deep red. Harmony of deep caves, you forget yourself. The gas beings are the enemy. But what if they're not? Harmony sang back, his crystal form, brightening to pale blue. What if human Jake is correct, and we've been solving the wrong equation for 300 years? Admiral Carter stood up in the human observation section. Jake could see her calculating the political risks, measuring the possibilities against the dangers. Finally, she spoke into her communicator. All human vessels, stand down to peaceful alert status. Repeat, stand down to peaceful alert. The effect was immediate and electric. If the humans were willing to lower their guard, it meant they believed something was changing. Other young delegates began to speak up, their voices mixing into a babble of different languages and communication methods. But the military leaders were not convinced. General Stone that breaks sang notes of absolute authority. A council recognizes only strength. Words are wind, and wind cannot stop crystal blades. Wait, Jake said, and somehow his human voice carried through all the alien sounds. General, you're absolutely right. Every being in the chamber turned to stare at him. Stone that breaks' crystal body chimed with surprise. Words can't stop. Weapons, Jake continued. Stories can't resurrect the dead. Understanding doesn't erase 3 centuries of legitimate anger and pain. He walked toward the Vorthic section, stopping just outside the environmental barrier. But understanding can do something else. It can help us stop making the same mistakes over and over again. Jake turned to address the entire chamber. All of your species are warriors. All of you have fought bravely to defend your people and your values. But what if you've been fighting the wrong war? Admiral Chrome's optical sensors focused on Jake with mechanical precision. Explain. You've been fighting each other, Jake said. But your real enemy isn't other species. Your real enemy is the misunderstanding that started this whole mess. The fear that makes you see threats where none exist. The assumption that being different means being wrong. War pattern zenith pulsed with skeptical orange light. The human proposes that we fight concepts instead of enemies. I'm proposing that we fight ignorance instead of each other, Jake said. I'm proposing that we declare war on the misunderstandings that have cost all of us so much. Flo's cloud body shifted to thoughtful gray patterns. The human suggests a different kind of warfare. Combat through learning rather than through destruction. Exactly, Jake said, feeling excitement build in his chest. What if we took all that energy you've been putting into fighting each other and used it to understand each other instead? Research Branch 7 rustled with growing enthusiasm. A cultural exchange program. Scientists and artists living among other species, learning their ways of thinking and creating. Dr. Mistwalker's gaseous form began to move in excited spirals. Imagine the research possibilities. Studying crystal harmonics from inside a Vorthic colony. Observing Sylvani growth. Patterns across multiple seasons. Young Harmony sang notes of pure eagerness. We could learn to translate our mathematical songs into gas flow equations. The Nethari could teach us about collective consciousness while we share our harmonic technologies. But the practical problems seemed overwhelming. Admiral Chrome's mechanical voice cut through the enthusiasm. Impossible. Our technology is incompatible with organic systems. Corvex upgrades would damage flesh-based beings. Sylvani life cycles make short-term exchanges impossible, Research Branch 7 added. We root for decades during growth phases. War pattern zenith flashed with harsh yellow light. Luminary energy forms would blind or burn matter-based beings. Physical proximity is dangerous. So we solve the problems, Jake said simply. All of your species are brilliant. All of you have technologies and capabilities that the others don't. Work together to find solutions. Flow began to pulse with rapid thought patterns, environmental suits for solid beings, containment fields for energy forms, compatibility protocols for mechanical upgrades, acceleration chambers to speed up Sylvani processes, Research Branch 7 suggested, or patience training for shorter-lived species to appreciate extended time scales. Neural interfaces to help individual minds experience collective consciousness safely, Dr. Mistwalker added. Harmony's crystal body rang with musical excitement. Harmonic translators that convert between different communication methods. Sound, to light, to chemical signals, to electromagnetic patterns. Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, real, practical, achievable hope. The human colonies, Admiral Carter said from her observation post. Several of our worlds have facilities designed to accommodate multiple species safely. We could serve as neutral meeting grounds. General Stone That Breaks sang a long, complex sequence of notes that sounded like deep thinking. Finally, the translation came through. The young singers speak of harmony between different crystal formations. In theory, such resonance could create more beautiful music than any single voice. Admiral Chrome's optical sensors dimmed and brightened in what Jake had learned was the Corvex equivalent of deep processing. Hypothesis accepted for testing. Cultural exchange program has potential for mutual improvement and optimization. War pattern zenith pulsed more slowly, cycling through colors that suggested careful consideration. If understanding reduces conflict, then understanding serves strategic military purposes. The chamber fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Not the dead quiet of hatred and fear, but the living quiet of minds working on new problems. Jake looked around at the faces, forms, and energy patterns surrounding him. For the first time in 300 years, the 5 species weren't looking at each other as enemies. The U's Harmony had never carried passengers like these before. Jake stood on the bridge, watching his crew make final preparations for the strangest voyage in human history. In 3 hours, they would depart for New Geneva Colony with representatives from all 5 alien species aboard the same ship. The modifications had taken 2 weeks, and the combined efforts of the galaxy's best engineers. The cargo bay had been converted into 5 specialized environmental zones connected by a central common area. Vorthic crystal chambers resonated with carefully tuned harmonics. Nefari gas containment systems provided perfect atmospheric control. Sylvani biochambers maintained precise soil and light conditions. Corvex technical areas offered unlimited upgrade and repair facilities. Luminary energy containment fields allowed safe interaction with matter-based beings. Final systems check. Complete, reported Lieutenant Ben Clark from the engineering station. All environmental systems are green across the board. Jake nodded, but his attention was focused on the docking bay monitors. The representatives were boarding now, and the tension was visible even through the security cameras. Harmony moved carefully through the corridors, his crystal body singing soft notes of nervousness. Flow had compressed itself into a dense cloud formation that indicated uncertainty. Research Branch 7 had pulled its branches tight against its trunk in the Sylvani equivalent of anxiety. Unit Designation Seeker moved with mechanical precision, but Jake could see the extra diagnostic scans it was running on everything it passed. Pattern of dancing light pulsed with rapid color changes that the translation computers couldn't keep up with. "They're scared," said Dr. Amy Webb, the ship's psychologist and Jake's closest advisor on this mission. "They should be," Jake replied. "They're about to spend 2 weeks in close quarters with people they've been taught to fear their entire lives." The first crisis came before they even left dock. Harmony's crystal form began resonating with stress patterns that interfered with the ship's navigation systems. The harmonics were beautiful, but completely incompatible with human technology. Jake found harmony in his chamber, surrounded by the soft blue glow of artificial crystal formations. A young Vorthik was singing rapid sequences of notes that sounded like panic. The metal walls distort the frequencies. Harmony sang when he saw Jake. I cannot find the proper resonance. The ship feels like a discordant cage. Jake sat down carefully near the crystal formations. Tell me about resonance. How does it work? Harmony's songs shifted to more teaching tones. Every structure has a natural frequency. When we sing in harmony with that frequency, we create beauty and strength. When we sing against it, we create discord and weakness. So the ship has its own song, Jake said thoughtfully. And you're trying to sing along with it, but the harmonies don't match. Precisely, Harmony chimed. Human. Construction follows mathematical principles that are alien to our music. Jake had an idea. What if we don't try to make you sing the ship's song? What if we help the ship learn to sing yours? It took 6 hours and the combined efforts of both species engineers, but they managed to install harmonic resonators throughout the ship. The resonators didn't change the ship's structure, but they translated Harmony's crystal songs into mechanical vibrations that actually improved the ship's efficiency. Fascinating, Seeker commented when the modifications were complete. Organic harmonic patterns optimize mechanical systems. This suggests potential for beneficial integration rather than replacement. The next crisis involved flow. The Nethari representative had tried to spread itself throughout the ship's ventilation system to explore and understand the environment. Unfortunately, its gaseous particles triggered every atmospheric contamination alarm on the ship. Jake found flow compressed into its containment chamber. Its cloud formed dark with embarrassment. Apologies, the translation systems provided. Collective. Curiosity overcame individual restraint. We wished to know the ship through direct contact. You were trying to merge with the ship? Jake asked. To understand through joining, as we do with all new experiences, Flo replied. But solid structures cannot share consciousness. Dr. Webb suggested a solution that surprised everyone. What? If we give Flo access to the ship's computer networks? Not to control anything, but to experience the ship's data flows and sensor readings. The integration took another day, but when it was complete, Flo had become the ship's most sophisticated environmental monitor. Its distributed consciousness could detect problems and opportunities that human sensors missed entirely. The ship lives, Flo reported with wonder. Not as we live, but with its own form of awareness. We sense the harmonies of crystal song, the precision of mechanical thought, the growth patterns of plant mind, the dance of energy being. Research Branch 7 faced different challenges. The Silvani representative had entered a root cycle just as they left dock, and for 36 hours it stood motionless in its chamber, while its underground root system established connections with the ship's biosupport systems. It's not dead, Jake assured the worried crew members. This is normal for Silvani. They're just thinking really, really slowly. When Branch finally emerged from its cycle, it had established root connections throughout the ship that turned the entire vessel into an extension of its body. It could monitor life support, detect structural stress, and even provide early warning of potential problems. The ship grows strong, Branch rustled with satisfaction. Metal bones, crystal songs, gas breath, mechanical mind, energy heart. A new form of life, perhaps. Seeker's integration proved the most beneficial and the most concerning. The Corvex representative immediately began improving everything it had encountered, upgrading systems with mechanical precision. In 3 days, it had optimized the ship's engines, navigation, life support, and communications. Careful, Dr. Webb, warned Jake. Seeker is making the ship more efficient, but it's also making it less human. Jake watched Seeker work and realized the problem. The Corvex wasn't trying to harm anything, but its improvements were removing the inefficiencies and quirks that made the ship feel alive to its human crew. "Seeker," Jake said, approaching the engineering area, "can I ask you about perfection?" "Perfection is the goal of all intelligent existence," Seeker replied without stopping its work. "Optimization eliminates weakness and error." "But what about beauty?" Jake asked. "What about the imperfections that make things interesting?" Seeker's optical sensors focused on Jake with confusion. "Imperfection is inefficiency. Inefficiency is waste." Jake thought about how to explain. "Harmony's crystal songs are mathematically perfect, but they're also unique. No two Vorthik sing exactly the same way. Isn't that imperfection beautiful?" Seeker processed this for a long moment. "Variation within optimization parameters serves evolutionary purposes. Diversity enables adaptation." "Exactly," Jake said. "Maybe perfect efficiency isn't the only goal. Maybe perfect effectiveness includes room for variation and beauty." The breakthrough came when Pattern of Dancing Light tried to communicate with the ship's computer core. The Luminary representative had been frustrated by the slow pace of matter-based communication. But when it interfaced directly with the ship's optical data systems, something wonderful happened. Pattern's energy patterns synchronized with the data flows, creating displays of light that were both functional and beautiful. Information became art, and art became information. The ship's computers suddenly processed data 3 times faster, and the command displays became works of light sculpture that were easier to read than traditional screens. "Beautiful," Harmony sang when he saw the new displays. "Light dancing. Makes information into music." "Efficient," Seeker acknowledged. "Energy being processing enhances mechanical capability." "Alive," Branch rustled. "All things connected, all minds sharing strength." "Unified," Flo whispered through the ships. "Speakers. Separate beings creating collective beauty." Jake stood on the bridge on their final day of travel, watching his strange crew work together. Harmony's songs provided background music that somehow made everyone more focused. Flo's consciousness monitored ship systems with impossible precision. Branch's root network kept life support perfectly balanced for all species. Seeker's upgrades had made every system more efficient without losing their character. Pattern's light displays turned routine operations into beautiful art. "You know, what's funny?" Dr. Webb said, joining him at the command station. "What's that?" Jake asked. "I don't think we're taking them to New Geneva to learn about each other," she said. "I think they've already learned. We're taking them there to show everyone else what's possible." Jake looked around the bridge at the impossible sight of 5 alien species working together in perfect harmony. "You're right," he said. "They're not students anymore. They're teachers." Outside the viewports, the New Geneva system grew larger and brighter. Soon, the galaxy would see what Jake had seen on this ship. 5 different species, 5 different ways of thinking and being, creating something more beautiful and more powerful than any of them could achieve alone. The war wasn't over yet, but looking at his crew, Jake knew it soon would be. The news traveled faster than the speed of light itself. By the time the UES Harmony reached New Geneva, every news service in the galaxy was broadcasting the impossible images. 5 species working together aboard a human ship. Ancient enemies. Sharing the same air, the same space, the same purpose. Jake watched the colony's landing bay fill with reporters, diplomats, and curious citizens from dozens of worlds. The crowd was a mixture of hope and skepticism, wonder and fear. Many had come to see if the reports were true. Others had come to see what they were sure would be a disaster. Governor Kate Miller met them at the landing platform. She was a practical woman in her 60s who had spent 30 years turning New Geneva from a frontier outpost into a thriving colony world. "Captain Morrison," she said with a tired smile, I hope you know what you're doing. Half the galaxy thinks you're a hero, and the other half thinks you're insane. Probably a little of both, Jake admitted as he watched his crew disembark. Sight was still amazing to him. Harmony's crystal body caught the sunlight and threw rainbow patterns across the landing platform. Flow had formed itself into an elegant spiral that moved like a living tornado. Branch carried itself on root legs that it had grown during the journey, walking like a tree that had learned to dance. Seeker moved with mechanical precision, but its optical sensors were constantly scanning and analyzing everything with what Jake had learned to recognize as Korvax's curiosity. Pattern flickered with rapid light displays that painted moving pictures in the air. The facilities are ready, Governor Miller continued. Modified HAB domes for each species, plus the central meeting complex you requested. But Jake, I have to ask, are you sure this is going to work? The security concerns alone. Her words were interrupted by a commotion in the crowd. A group of human protesters had started chanting, "Humans first, Earth for Earth." Their signs called the aliens, monsters and invaders. Similar groups were present for each species. Young Vorthik, who sang discordant songs of species purity, Nethari storm clouds crackling with angry lightning, Sylvani, whose branches had grown into aggressive thorn patterns, Korvax, whose optical sensors glowed with hostile red light, Luminari, who pulsed with warning colors. Jake felt his heart sink. He had hoped that seeing the cooperation aboard his ship would be enough to change minds, but hatred was harder to kill than he had thought, and something unexpected happened. Harmony walked toward the human protesters, his crystal body ringing with soft, musical notes. The crowd fell silent, unsure what to expect. When Harmony reached the protesters, he began to sing Dot. It wasn't the mathematical harmony songs Jake had grown used to. This was different, simpler, somehow more human. The melody was one Jake recognized, an old Earth song about peace and understanding. Harmony had learned it during the journey and translated it into crystal music that somehow made the words more beautiful than they had ever been. One by one, other members of the crew joined in. Flow formed sound patterns that provided harmony. To Harmony's melody, Branch rustled its leaves in rhythm. Seeker's mechanical voice added precise counter-melodies. Pattern painted the words in the air with dancing lights. The effect on the crowd was electric. The protesters stopped chanting, their signs lowering as they listened to their own species' song of peace, performed by the aliens they had come to. Hate, parents lifted children to see the light paintings. Elderly citizens wiped tears from their eyes. Even the reporters stopped talking into their cameras. When the song ended, the silence stretched for long moments. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, came the sound of applause. It started with one person, then spread like wildfire through the assembled thousands. Human hands clapping, Vorthic crystals chiming, Nethari clouds producing thunderclaps, Sylvani. Branches rustling, Korvax limbs striking together, luminary beings pulsing with bright approval. "Well," Governor Miller said quietly, "I guess that answers my question." The next 6 months transformed New Geneva into something unprecedented in galactic history. The cultural exchange program that had begun as an experiment became a movement. That spread across hundreds of worlds. Jake found himself appointed as the first Director of Interspecies Cultural Understanding, a position that existed nowhere in any government charter, but which every species seemed to recognize as essential. His office was in the central complex, surrounded by the HAB domes where representatives from all 5 species lived and worked together. Each day brought new discoveries and new friendships. Vorthic crystal singers learned to create harmonics that could carry Nethari consciousness across vast distances. Nethari weather shapers collaborated with Sylvani gardeners to create growing environments that had never existed before. Sylvani bioengineers worked with Korvax technicians to develop living machines that grew instead of being built. Corvex efficiency experts helped luminary artists create light sculptures that achieved perfect beauty through mathematical precision. But the real breakthrough came when the children arrived. Nobody had planned for it, but young beings from all species began visiting New Geneva with their parents and teachers. Vorthic crystal buds barely old enough to sing simple notes. Nethari cloud wisps still learning to maintain individual consciousness. Sylvani saplings with only a few dozen leaves. Corvex units still in their organic phases before technological integration. Luminary sparklings, whose light was gentle enough not to hurt matter-based eyes. The young beings had none of their elders' fears and preconceptions. They played together, learned together, created together. Jake often found them in the central complex, engaged in games that would have been impossible for any single species to imagine. "Look," Dr. Webb said one afternoon, pointing to a group of youngsters near the Fountain Plaza. A Vorthic crystal bud was teaching a Nethari cloud wisp how to sing solid matter into new shapes. A Sylvani sapling was showing a Corvex unit how to grow circuits instead of building them. A luminary sparkling was creating light stories that the others watched with wonder. They're not learning to tolerate each other, Jake realized. They're learning to be something new together. The political changes followed the cultural ones. Species that had fought for 3 centuries began to sign cooperation agreements. Trade routes reopened. Research projects that had been impossible for any single species became routine collaborations. The military fleets that had faced each other across battle lines began to stand down. Not everyone was happy with the changes. General Stone that breaks resigned his commission rather than accept peace with the gas chaos. Admiral Chrome was reassigned to frontier exploration duties where his perfectionist tendencies couldn't interfere with diplomatic progress. War Pattern Zenith was recalled to luminary space in disgrace, but for every hardliner who resisted, 10 younger beings embraced the new possibilities. Jake received reports from colonies and worlds across the galaxy of interspecies cooperation projects, cultural exchanges, and even the first interspecies friendships in galactic history. The formal end of the war came almost anticlimactically. The 5 species signed the Treaty of New Geneva on a bright spring day exactly 1 year after Jake had first told his story about the blind men and the elephant. The ceremony was simple, just representatives from each species adding their signatures, songs, light patterns, and chemical markers to a document that officially ended 3 centuries of conflict. Jake stood in the same central plaza where Harmony had first sung an Earth song to a crowd of strangers. Now the plaza was filled with beings from all 6 species, no longer strangers, but neighbors, colleagues, friends. Harmony approached, his crystal body now permanently tuned to frequencies that could be safely heard by all species. Human Jake. He sang in notes that had become familiar and comforting. We have learned to hear the greater symphony. Flow drifted nearby, its gaseous form moving in patterns that Jake had learned meant contentment and satisfaction. The separate instruments now play in harmony. Branch's wooden voice rustled with deep satisfaction. The young growth has taken root in good soil. Seeker's optical sensors glowed with warm blue light instead of the harsh red of suspicion. Optimization, through cooperation, has exceeded all projected parameters. Pattern-painted words of light in the air above them. The dance includes all dancers. Jake looked around at the plaza filled with impossible sights. Vorthic children teaching Nethari. Youngsters how to make music from mathematics. Sylvani gardeners showing Corvex engineers how to grow technology instead of building it. Luminary artists collaborating with human painters to create sculptures of light and matter that neither species could have imagined alone. You know what the best part is? Jake said to his alien friends. What? They asked in their various ways. This is just the beginning. We've learned to understand each other, but now we get to discover what we can create together. Above them, the stars looked different than they had a year ago. They no longer marked the boundaries between warring territories. They were stepping stones to a future that no single species could have built alone. But all of them together were just beginning to imagine. The galaxy was finally learning to sing in harmony, and the song was more beautiful than any of them had ever dreamed possible.